Hey guys, this video is going to introduce Norse mythology to you. Norse mythology, the book by Neil Gaiman, not Norse mythology, all of it. We'll have to learn as we go. So you'll need to make sure that you read an introduction and that you read the players. There are audio files if you want to listen to me read to you. I don't guarantee that I've pronounced everything correctly, but I've tried to, and we'll learn more about it as we go, and we'll get better as we go. In an introduction, this is Neil Gaiman writing an introduction to his book, Norse Mythology. And it's not really a book. This is not like a novel. This is a collection of mythological stories in Norse mythology. So he's retelling these stories, and he got them from their original source work. He was influenced, he talks about, he was influenced by a lot of the different versions of Norse mythology. So as you read that part, make sure you make note. When you annotate, remember that you actually write things down. But make notes about the different versions that he discusses. He talks about the American versions of the comic books. He talks about some of the original, the verses that they weren't the original ones. It was not originally written. These were originally passed verbally or orally, but they were written down, and those are some of the earliest ones that we have. Notice how those original versions, or how the written versions, change over time to represent different cultural values. He talks about how the American Thor and the American Loki look a lot different from those, quote, originals, or the more traditional tellings of Norse mythology. Also notice when he discusses Ragnarok. This is the most important element of Norse mythology. It's the end. And he even asks, while he's writing, has it happened yet? So in the tellings of Norse mythology, you don't know if Ragnarok has occurred. You know it will occur, and you know what will happen, and you know what's happening until it occurs, but there's no resolution about if it has occurred yet. And so that'll be something for y'all to look into and decide for yourself as we read the book or as we finish the book. Also note that the fact that all the gods face destruction through Ragnarok, that's what makes them different from a lot of other Greek gods, or other, like, Greek mythology and other gods in general. They're fallible. They make mistakes, and they can die, and they will die. In Greek mythology, the gods aren't the heroes. The people are the heroes, because the people have to deal with all the nonsense that the gods do. And the gods just get to play their little game and manipulate everybody. But you don't see them have any real struggles. All the struggles fall to the people. In Norse mythology, I think our gods are our heroes and our villains, as Neil Gaiman discusses. That's why he's so attracted to them. They will die. They will meet their end, and it will be gruesome and violent and horrible. They make their own problems, and they face the consequences of those problems. And so I think that's really interesting and something unique that we don't see in Greek mythology so much. You see a few gods punished for things, but nothing crazy. The last thing I want you to make note of in an introduction is his discussion of the spread of Norse beliefs. It is a little complicated. This is not history that we know super well. We haven't been introduced to it very much, and so we'll watch some videos to learn about the spread of the people. I think that these stories are fascinating because the stories are limited. We're missing so much. As the tells and the people spread, they also ran into Christianity. They fought against peoples who were Christian. And so as those people won the wars over time, or the battles over time, that culture and that belief system took over. And so we've lost a lot of these through time. And so maybe you'll start considering, as you read, stories that you wish you knew, and maybe stories that you could tell. You could fill in some of those blanks. I think that would be really interesting. Also note that split between the Aesir and the Vanir. or the Vanir. We'll talk about that a little bit more too, and it pops up a lot throughout the stories. So make sure that you read an introduction, make some notes on the different versions, make some notes on the importance of Ragnarok, and make some notes on the spread of Norse beliefs. If you have questions, write those down. Those will be some things for us to look into and talk about. So at this point, pause the video, read an introduction, make your annotations. So the next part that we're going to look at is the players. The players runs us through Odin, Thor, Loki, and some of their genealogy. And so this is a really important actual introduction to the stories. So as you read the players, and again, this is there are audio files so that you can listen to me read to you if you would like, but you need to make note of similarities that you notice between Norse mythology and anything else you've ever read. That's always really important. We see these elements intertwined throughout literature, throughout time periods. And so when you see something that is similar or something that is vastly different or unique, you need to make a note of it. Remember, do not just highlight. Make sure that you highlight and write down what you're noticing. Another thing that I think is very interesting to track, especially in the players, is the impact that the gods have on the world. That's what we see a lot in Norse mythology, that any phenomena that exists in the human world is accredited to the gods. We see that also in Greek mythology. I also want you to track the epithets that you read. Epithets are descriptions used for names, and so it's using a quality or an attribute of that person for their name. For example, in the Odyssey, you had a lot of white-armed Hera, or even white-armed Athena, the red-haired Menelaus, and like a modern example, the King of Pop. That's another name for Michael Jackson. So we use epithets a lot. They give descriptions of that person. They indicate characteristics. And we'll see a lot of those in Norse mythology, just like you did in the Odyssey. The other thing that I want you to really pay attention to are some of the motifs that we'll be tracking. Now, we've already talked about motifs a little bit. We looked at them in Anthem. So you already know that, we tracked light and dark in Anthem. Light was symbolic, dark was symbolic, and they were some symbols of knowledge, education, enlightenment, all of those things. So motifs are symbols or elements that exist in literature across cultures and across time periods. We see them over and over and over again. And motifs lead to themes, right? Light or dark on its own, not a theme. But we can take what we learn about that motif and develop it into a theme. And we did that with Anthem. In the Odyssey, I'm sure y'all studied nostalgia as a motif. Odysseus wanted to return home. He was nostalgic for his home. And once he got home, it was changed. And that's something that we always notice with nostalgia. We longingly look back on our past, even if it's not quite exactly as we thought it was. Homecoming was another motif in the Odyssey. That concept of, as far as you go away from home, coming home is the best. That's why we have homecoming, like in high schools and colleges and stuff like that. You're coming back to your roots. So in Norse mythology, I would like for you to watch for duality. Duality is looking at two sides of one thing, or how one person can be dual, can have good and bad, can have light and dark. So duality, seeing those extreme opposites within one element. The concept of the violent world. In Norse mythology, the world was created in an act of violence, and it will end in an act of violence. And so we see that violence run throughout. I want you to notice the motif of deception. We know Loki already is a trickster figure. He's a trickster character, and that he is very deceiving, and that's where a lot of the entertainment in these stories comes from. But we'll notice a lot of other deception floating around as well, and it drives storyline. It reveals personalities, attributes, characteristics that wouldn't otherwise be there. I know this is, my handwriting here is really bad, but fallibility. The gods here are not infallible. They do make mistakes. Even Odin is not all-knowing. So when you notice a mistake that is made by a god or a character, just make a note. It's showing that fallibility, that they all make mistakes. And then finally, for now, transformation. See if you notice elements in the story or in the players that indicate transformation, change from one thing to another. So at this time, I want you to pause the video and I want you to go through and read the players: Odin, Thor, and Loki. When you're finished, come back to the video and I'm going to show you some of the things that I annotated. So to start us off on some of the things that I noticed, we have so much introduction to characters, and so just like we did with Anthem, make sure that you box your characters and that you underline their descriptions. Now, don't get too crazy with underlining, because clearly, this whole thing is a description of Odin, and the whole next one is a description of Thor, and the whole next one is a description of Loki. So just kind of mark those real quick, essential elements. I noted on Odin sacrificed himself to himself. That reminded me of that motif of a violent world. He had to sacrifice himself in order to learn magic and to learn how to read the runes. He gave an eye for wisdom. I don't know the circumstance under which he gave his eye, but I can't imagine any giving of an eye that isn't violent. Odin has many names. He is the All-Father, the Lord of the Slain, the Gallows God. He's the god of cargoes and of prisoners. He's called Grimnir and Third. So these are all epithets. Descriptions. Oh, I ran out of screen. Cute. All right. Anyway, so those are some epithets that I noticed. I also made a note here about his ravens. We see birds a lot throughout literature, throughout time periods. Birds can represent all kinds of things. They can represent life, wisdom. They can represent death. So I'm thinking life from like the flood story in Genesis, when we send out the doves, or Noah sends out the dove to find if there is growth in life. If it doesn't return, then there's life, there's growth. We see owls as wisdom. We see crows and maybe even ravens sometimes as death, like in Edgar Allan Poe. And so, of course, Odin, the All-Father, has ravens. He calls them Hugin and Munin, which mean thought and memory. They fly back and forth across the world. They're messengers for Odin. They bring him knowledge of everything. So he's not all-knowing, but he has tools to help him see. So I'm going to make a little note of that. He's not all-knowing, but he has tools. Tools to help him see. I also thought it was interesting that we have this little note up here. It said, he's worshipped in different forms and many tongues, but it's always Odin they worship. So this is that reference to the fact that they're saying Odin is God. So it doesn't matter if you call him God, or if you call him Allah, or if you call him Zeus, or if you call him anything else. Odin is God. That's it. He's the one. He's the big one. I just thought that was kind of cool. So I just made a little note that this is a reference to all religions. So I made a note down here. He brought war into the world. This is his impact on the world. They attribute all deaths in battle to Odin, and that's also that motif of violence. So we have impact on world and violence. Now, I don't recommend that you write over all your words like that. You're not going to be able to read anything in your book. I'm just writing like that because that's the only place on this screen that I have to write. Next up, I made a note about these Valkyries. I thought that was interesting. You know, there's this famous song, Ride of the Valkyries. They're beautiful battle maidens who collect the souls of the noble dead and take you and bring you to the hall known as Valhalla. So, if you die a noble death, this is your reward. And so it's really important to them that if they die in battle, they die in a noble battle. Reward for noble death. All right, now moving on to Thor. I'm going to clean my screen a little bit just because it's driving me crazy. I made it worse. All right, so Thor, Odin's son, is the Thunderer. We start off that first sentence with an epithet. So we've got an epithet. Scoop. I just spelled it wrong too. There we go. Epithet. What else do we have? The Thunderer. We have all these names of his weapons and his strength fortifiers. Also, we got strength. He's the strongest. We have some repetition here of strength and strongest, obviously to emphasize how strong he is. He's the strong one. We've got Thor's mother was Jord, his sons, his daughters. We have a little bit of genealogy here, and that is an epic convention. We have genealogies in all epics. There's a lot of focus on who you are and whose you are. We have Ulrul. Okay, so that name's really hard to say. But I was doing a little bit of research on this, and the concept of Ulrul came from this Germanic word called Wulpaz, which means glory. I thought that was really interesting. You know, I don't know if you learned this last year, but you have a concept, two concepts in Greek mythology called bite and metis. This concept of glory, this Germanic concept of glory, reminded me of that. We also have in Greek mythology the concept of arete, that perfection, that Greek perfection. I think this word vulpus, which is not going to be pronounced that at all. It's going to be like vulpus, something like that. But this concept of glory, vulpus, was going to be really important. I think we're going to see that a lot. So we might add that to our motifs. So Ulrul is a god who hunts. Also, I thought this was so funny, but I shouldn't be surprised. In epics or in mythology, we see things that are important to the culture who wrote them. He's the god with skis. How cool is that? I've never thought about a god with skis before, but I guess when you come from a cold, snowy place, you gotta have a god with skis. Dude's gotta travel. All right, Loki. I made a massive note here about all this. He is plausible, convincing, likable, and far away the most wily, subtle, and shrewd of all the inhabitants of Asgard. And it's a pity then that there's so much darkness inside of him. Loki is our duality. We see it the most in him, but as we see it in him, we'll see it in other people as well. This reminded me of our good friend Hermes from Greek mythology. He's got shoes that fly, isn't it Hermes that has little shoes that can fly, little wings on his feet? I don't know. I think so. Let's see. I had Null. We have another epithet there. This girl's real name is Laufey, and she goes by Null or Needle because she's slim and beautiful and sharp. Farbalti, his name in and of itself is an epithet because Farbalti literally means he who strikes dangerous blows. He's a giant. That's cool. Loki's filled with all kinds of cool stuff. All right, I also noted that on the next page, and we're almost done, so hang in there, that he is more, oh, it's this part right here, sorry. He is more cunning than any other god. So this goes with that concept that I was talking about earlier with Olril, that glory concept. So our boy Loki does not have strength. He has cunning. And if you remember in Greek mythology, Metis is cunning and strength is Bai. So Loki has Metis. Thor has Bai. Okay, so that's how we see that. If you remember from the Odyssey, Odysseus did have Bai. He was very physically strong, but when it comes down to it, he really relied on his Metis more often than his strength, because he often faced challengers who were far more strong than he was. Last couple of little things. Loki makes the world more interesting, but less safe. We've got a little bit of duality here that I noticed. So there's that. We also have some foreshadowing. We know that things aren't going to go well for Loki. And I wonder if y'all do know what actually happens to Loki, if you've found out yet from either the game that you play or from any of the videos that you've watched. But that's what I have so far. I've made note of a couple of similarities that we saw, just noticing, Odin is God across religions. You're just calling him by a different name according to the Norse. The impact that the gods have on the world, we saw that especially with Odin, that, when you die in battle, it's Odin. Odin had done something there. The epithets, all those names for Odin, a couple of names in Loki's little chapter. And then those motifs. We saw a lot about violence in a violent world. Did you notice anything about deception? If so, I want to know, because I missed it. I haven't seen much on fallibility, except maybe that little hint of Loki's destruction there at the end. Oh, I did see something on transformation. I just forgot to note it, but that moment when Odin was hanging from the tree, and he has that transformation to where now he understands magic and he can read the runes. That is a moment of transformation. So let me know, if all of this made sense. Make sure that I get a chance to look at your annotations, and I hope you enjoyed the first part of our story.